Welcome to Thinking Green. I'm Rana, and I wanted to let people know that on Monday, June 22nd, at 7 p.m., there's going to be a presentation for the Board of Education that's being given by the New London Discipline Policy Work Group. And it should be really interesting. New London parent advocates have been studying New London discipline, what's being done and what some options are, and they're making their presentation on Monday. And so with that in mind, our show tonight is related to that presentation. Our guests tonight are Brenda Kavanaugh, and she's the Executive Director of Community Mediation, Inc. In New Haven, and Kris, who is a violence prevention educator for Safe Futures in New London.
Thanks for having us. Well,
thanks for coming on. I guess since people probably don't know either of you too well, if you could each talk about the organizations you work for and what your roles are, and either order.
Kris, why don't you go first?
Great. So thanks for having us, Rana. My name is Kris, and I work for Safe Futures. I'm a violence prevention educator and program coordinator and a restorative practices practitioner, which we'll talk more about. Safe Futures is the local domestic violence and sexual assault agency, and our mission is threefold. It's to save lives, restore hope, and change the future. As a prevention educator, I work on that change side of things, going into schools, mostly middle schools and high schools, but we also have a really integral elementary program too, trying to teach young people how to solve their problems without violence.
Maybe if they can learn that, we'll have a world full of adults who know that.
That's exactly the idea. That being a necessary step to prevent partner violence.
Brenda.
Yeah, so thank you, Rana. Also, I'm Brenda Kavanaugh. I am the Executive Director of Community Mediation. We are in the New Haven region, and we provide services to anyone in Connecticut who's interested. So we provide mediation and facilitation services. If someone is in conflict, then we offer third-party impartial facilitation. But we also do a lot of training, and recently did training in New London with a group of community activists and members of the Juvenile Review Board, which is for first-time offending youth. The training was in mediation and restorative conferencing with the eye to creating a more restorative process in the Juvenile Review Board itself.
So is this like a first step in the process, or do these trainings teach people, these adults, what they need to know basically to do their job?
I think they could do it. Yeah, so actually on the way up here, Kris was saying that she was offering mediation services to someone that she knows who is expressing concern about a conflict at work. They go through 40 hours of training, we're with them 9 to 5, 5 days, and I think by the end of the 5th day, most people are prepared enough to be able to go and do it themselves. Certainly, if they can have someone who's experienced and can co-mediate with them or work with them as a facilitator for a conference, that's ideal. But I think they're ready.
And we do have a slide I want to put up briefly with information about the organizations, because as we talk, some people might be interested in taking part in some of the services. So, and we'll try to show this towards the end as well.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Okay. Well, so I guess my question is, what are we seeing in schools now? And I'm not just focusing on New London, but most schools might be in the process of changing their discipline policies, but it hasn't really happened yet. So what is happening on the discipline front in most of our public schools?
So I think most schools that I work in and most schools that I know about use fairly traditional discipline models. And at a school by school or district by district basis, weave in different attempts at being restorative, but by and large, I think a lot of schools view conflict as a disruption to learning. Whereas I think we both share a belief that conflict is an opportunity for learning and not actually a disruption for learning.
Mm-hmm. And before the show, we were talking about how the atmosphere in schools has changed a lot since we were in school. I never had a school resource officer in my high school. Mm-hmm. So how did all this start in the 60s and 70s and 80s and maybe even 90s? We weren't seeing such a I hate to say proactive, but an aggressive approach to controlling conflict.
Yeah, I think aggressive is the right word for it. In 1995 was when the concept of zero tolerance was introduced and really took off in a lot of schools. And that zero tolerance is basically you're going to get suspended for everything from passing a Midol to your friend to trying to share Skittles with a friend and you're 8 years old. Even as silly as farting in class, kids have been suspended for that. So what they found in 2007, there was a comprehensive study across the United States that showed that only 5% of suspensions was actually attributable to weapons or drugs, that 95% were just due to misconduct.
And I know a lot of schools locally, a lot of those suspensions have to do with school policy violations, mm-hmm. which is a very broad sweeping term, right. But oftentimes students don't even know what is and isn't a school policy violation. That's not oftentimes right. Not even spelled out within the policy itself. And examples that Brenda cited are classic examples of what can happen. It's not just these violent offenses. People hear folks being critical of suspensions and expulsions, and they assume that we're saying people should get a free ride when they're right. violent, and that's not what we're talking about at all.
This almost seems like it's the school equivalent of like the broken windows approach in response to a couple of very violent school shootings. Mm-hmm. We don't want any shooters to come and kill people, so if your uniform shirt, you're wearing the wrong color shirt, you're suspended. The assumption is that things will escalate.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really good intention behind some of these zero tolerance policies that did really pick up a lot of speed after incidents like Columbine, where adults wanted to protect children, and that's totally understandable, but there have been a lot of people affected in the wake of these policies who actually aren't dangerous and aren't criminal.
And they're suffering because of it.
Absolutely.
Well, there's a slide that I'd like to put up because let's talk a little bit about the science of misbehavior and stress.
So in conflict, my short version definition of conflict is that someone's needs are not being met. But what's happening biologically is that when you are triggered by a threat, and that could be a physical threat or it could be an emotional threat, it could be a threat to your ego. Your amygdala takes only a quarter of a second to be triggered. And when your amygdala gets triggered, it essentially takes over your brain functions. So your prefrontal cortex is not working at capacity, and that's where all the sort of logic and reasoning resides. So when your amygdala gets triggered, you go into fight, flight, or freeze mode. And that's what you see a lot of times happening with adolescents who haven't learned to get control of their amygdala, because you can't get control of it.
Now, I wonder, is the fact that a lot of students, I think, are suffering from sleep deprivation, does that exacerbate it? Because I always worry about sleep-deprived people and their thinking brains not thinking very well.
I think sleep deprivation, but I think also a lot of other things. So kids are coming to school, they're hungry. They had a fight with their parents the night before. They may be experiencing other violence within the home. There's a lot of trauma going on out there that people aren't recognizing, and we have this sort of cultural idea that talking about those things that go on in the home is shameful, and so we teach kids to feel shame around those things, and that also contributes to your amygdala being triggered very easily.
Yeah.
And now, it doesn't take long for this to happen. I mean, for the, from a trigger experience, that it can escalate really fast.
Absolutely. And then it takes approximately 20 minutes to come back down from that heightened anxiety and heightened heart rate and adrenaline in the system. So what we try to tell people is, at the moment of the triggering, you're probably not at your best to deal with the conflict in a rational and effective way. So give it some time, come back and have a discussion.
Okay, we have a slide that kind of shows the timeline. And it's 20 minutes. So if a student is having an outburst, I'm guessing that the natural reaction of the adults around him or her would be to de-escalate immediately.
Right, and you can de-escalate in terms of, the student may need to be removed from the environment, put them in a place where they can take deep breaths and calm down. It's not helpful to get in someone's face and scream at them, or to slap handcuffs on them, or to berate them. That just escalates.
Yeah, it seems like the expectations of schools are sort of contrary to the biology within us. And those expectations are really fair. I mean, they're coming from a lot of pressure on schools to perform at higher and higher levels, under more and more standards constantly. So I don't fault any particular administrator or teacher. Right? The expectations are, the forces are much broader than that, but there isn't room for this natural biological process.
And really, I mean, you can have your school atmosphere work with biology or against it, and if it works against it, we all work a lot harder.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And again, I think we really believe conflict's an opportunity for learning, and schools are supposed to be environments of learning. Yet oftentimes conflict is just viewed as a disruption to learning, not an opportunity for even more learning to take place.
Well, I guess it's the kind of learning that you're not going to, be able to fill out the bubble on a test to confirm that you learned.
Right.
Well, now, since you mentioned conflict, what are the responses to conflict?
So these are just a variety of responses. I don't think we necessarily need to go through every specific one, but human beings have naturally different options to conflict when it occurs, right? Sometimes we want to avoid it, sometimes we accommodate and we want to give in. Okay, whatever the other person needs, I'm just going to go with that. We compete, there's this win or lose, it's whatever I want, and if at whatever expense that causes you, doesn't matter. Oftentimes we compromise, which we are oftentimes taught to view as the ultimate best choice, when really collaboration is the actual win-win, where both parties look at their needs and find a solution to meet both of those needs. There's just a variety of individual responses we can have depending on the situation or who we're having that conflict with.
Mm-hmm. So how the school, the teachers, the staff deal with the conflict can really determine whether these children are responding in a way that is ultimately helpful for them or really isn't helpful.
And for the teachers and administrators as well. So, if you sit down with the student and take a few minutes to find out what is the underlying problem, not only do you help that child to actually deal with the real issue, but that child then comes back into your room and respects you and has faith that you're there looking out for their best interests.
My background was early childhood education, and it's true that the key to children having a handle on how kids behave is to have a bond.
Absolutely, and for them to have some ownership and power in the relationship. I was a high school teacher for 6 years, and one of the schools that I worked at, was specifically for children who had been kicked out of their local public high schools because of behavior. And we were having a problem with them destroying the property, defacing the property, leaving trash out in the common areas. And we decided, like, why are we fighting this? Let's let them take responsibility. So we allowed them to choose what paints they wanted to put up. They chose posters. They chose how to decorate the outside. And once they took ownership of that, nobody was allowed to deface anything because it was, I painted that wall. No, you're not going to write on it.
Yeah, great idea, because, and you were talking about high schoolers,
yes,
who are
high
near
school.
adulthood, who really need to be able to take ownership of their lives.
Exactly.
One of the awesome things about restorative practices is there's so many different tools that it comes with that really allow for so many opportunities for teachers to create these positive relationships where they actually connect and there's an actual bond there.
Now,
we'll get to that later.
Now, I guess this next slide is how traditional responses are seen in schools. Mm-hmm. So, and this might be pretty familiar to most people. You know, suspensions, expulsions, transfers to alternative schools or adult ed, sometimes zero tolerance. Mm-hmm. And I know that the federal government has started taking a look at these practices. Mm-hmm. And I found a paper, or a letter that was written by the Department of Justice in conjunction with the Department of Education that really spelled out that these should be methods of last resort, how it was very clear that they were being used unevenly across racial lines, mm-hmm. Across socioeconomic lines, and that's against the law. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's some real risk to these policies, not just locally. Like you said, it's a national problem. Yeah. But there's some real risks. Students really, really suffer. And luckily, we are seeing this, Justice Department come out with reports encouraging school systems to move in another direction. And the good news is there's an alternative. It's not just we should stop doing this, but we don't know what to do. Restorative practices is a real viable alternative that school systems around the country are also starting to shift towards.
And I noticed, looking at the letter from the Department of Justice, that they do recommend alternative types of, of responses to conflict that include restorative practices.
Absolutely.
And include, prioritizing responses to be more in line with how big an offense it was. Because as you both mentioned, sometimes it's a very small offense that a student might be suspended for. Mm-hmm. And of course, another concern is that students who are suspended are much more likely to become dropouts ultimately. Absolutely. So they're going to go through their whole life without the tools they need for success.
Yeah, so Kris actually has some points in the next slide about the actual effects.
So these are a couple statistics all taken from the Advancement Project as recently as July 2013. 3 million students are suspended nationally every year. This number's been on the rise for decades. African American students are 3 times more likely to be suspended than white students. And youth of color, LGBTQ students, and students with disabilities are punished more often and more harshly than their peers for the exact same behavior. And like Brenda just said, just one suspension doubles a student's risk of dropping out. So there's real consequences here when ultimately I think all of the teachers, administrators, community members really want our children to succeed in schools. We all want to see achievement for everyone, yet these policies are having dramatically different effects.
And I will say, in defense of teachers and administrators, with all of this standardized testing coming down, they've got 25 to 30 kids in the class. They're thinking, how can I possibly spend this time sitting down to get to the bottom of a kid's problem?
Right, and who's watching out for the other 25.
Right. And I do think that there's a lot of time and effort that's put in, especially at the beginning. And once you have that culture set in your school, you actually don't have to deal with these things all the time. It actually saves time in the long run, because once you create that environment, the kids are no longer exhibiting those behaviors that require that time.
And that I can really appreciate, because you know, when I worked in preschools, the first month, you work like crazy.
Yeah.
But you know, if you don't work like crazy the first month, you just work for like crazy the whole rest of the year.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, you know, you do pay now or you pay later.
Right.
You're
Exactly.
not going to get off the hook.
And, you know, to show how effective this is, you know, I've read several articles. There's lots of school districts across the country who are instituting these policies. So in 2010, the whole Boston public school system decided to change to a restorative practice model. They had approximately 800 suspensions in that year. 1 year later, 12 months later, they only had 135 suspensions. And they weren't spending all of their time kicking kids out of school.
And I'm guessing the suspensions weren't just that they weren't suspending kids, but children weren't exhibiting the behaviors that caused this.
Exactly.
The suspensions.
They were getting to the root problems, which is really what restorative practices are about and mediation is about, that there's a conflict going on, there's an underlying need that's not being met. Figure out what that need is, find a way to meet that need, and the behavior is not going to continue.
One of the fundamental hypotheses, I should have put this in the PowerPoint, of restorative practices is that human beings are happier, more cooperative, more productive, and more likely to make positive changes in their behavior when people in positions of authority do things with them rather than to them or for them.
Oh, wow.
So when people do things with them rather than to them or for them, we can compare that to traditional discipline is this sort of top-down heavy.
It is.
You will do this, you will be out of school, you will come back in 3 days, or you will sit in an in-school suspension classroom. It's a very to form.
Right.
It's not that good at changing behavior. It makes sense that a lot of administrators feel the need to use those techniques when, like you said, the pressures are so great on achievement, on preparing for these tests. And in fact, referrals, I know the rate in which referrals are coming to administrators is so high that in many ways dealing with things restoratively just feels impossible because the referrals stack up before they can take an alternate approach. But these tools can allow teachers to ultimately deal with some conflicts in the classroom so the referrals never have to be made.
And it's been proven that if kids are feeling safe and respected and loved, that they actually do better academically.
Right, there's a connection between these.
Well, it goes back, I think, to the brain picture you showed at the beginning, that you're not going to be able to work on the math problem if you're all stressed out. If cortisone is running through your system,
Exactly.
algebra, it's just not going to get any attention at all.
Exactly.
Well, we teach math and English in schools every single year for a reason, right? We think students need to practice these skills every year, yet we minimize the need to teach conflict resolution skills, pro-social skills. We minimize the need to teach that, on a yearly basis. We just sort of expect.
And which are we all going to use for the rest of our lives, really? I mean, I don't use algebra anymore. I'm sure some people do, but I don't.
Right.
Well, and for language skills, actually, the restorative justice practices kind of enhance your communication skills. So
Absolutely.
They're not separate, really, from an English lesson.
And a lot of the tools of restorative practices can be used to implement as teaching tools in regular course studies, in math, in science, in language arts, in social studies, all of that. These skills can be used, they can be woven together. They're very, very cooperative in that way.
Now we have a slide about what is restorative practice, because we've been using the word a lot without really explaining what it is.
Yeah, so restorative practices as an alternative, we're going to define restorative justice as a response to wrongdoing. It emphasizes restoring relationships by repairing the harm done. some restorative principles and practices. They help, one, hold those who committed the harm accountable for their actions. So this isn't light and fluffy. It holds people accountable. In fact, in a harsher way than traditional discipline, in my opinion. It too provides those harmed with a safe place to share how they were impacted and what they need, whereas traditional discipline oftentimes does not incorporate the person harmed. It doesn't incorporate their voice or needs into the resolution. And three, it includes other members of the community. In this case, we're talking about schools in the process of restoration. So oftentimes, a conflict might not be just between two people, right? It happens perhaps in a classroom between two students, but other students are there and they're affected, or the teacher is affected. There's a whole, conflict doesn't just stay between two people. Frequently, there's many people who are affected.
And sometimes the witnesses are more upset than the people who are involved.
Absolutely. So where appropriate, restorative practices is an opportunity to include those people in the process.
Now you mentioned how it's holds the perpetrator accountable. How does that work?
So,
well, do you want to talk about restorative circle and conferencing, and I'll talk about victim offender mediation?
Sure.
Okay, and we do have a slide that summarizes it, but we can show that after maybe.
Sure. Yeah. So let's take do you have a particular incident in mind?
I was actually going to tell us this. Well, I'll go ahead and talk about victim offender mediation. Victim offender mediation is one practice of restorative justice. So what we do is we, of course, ask the person who has been harmed first if they want to participate. We never force people to participate in this. We don't want to re-traumatize people. And one of the things that our traditional justice system has overlooked is that sometimes the victim does want to sit down with the party and say, this is what happened to me as a result of your actions. So they sit down at the table together, they both get to tell their story about what happened, and then they both try to craft some sort of way to move forward. So for example, you might have a kid who destroyed an older woman's garden because he was fooling around with his friends. She gets to tell him how much that garden meant to him, and then oftentimes what it turns into is a transformed relationship. So that woman may say, the way I want you to repair the harm is I want you to come to my garden for the next 3 weeks and replant all the flowers. So it's not just that he gets shamed and expelled from society, and she ends up spending the rest of her life thinking of him as this evil kid. They actually transform their relationship and learn why it happened and how to move forward.
And just as a general thing in our criminal justice system, not just in schools, it seems as though we've become very punitive without really setting things right. A response based on restitution more than locking people up in very large numbers would probably make for a more peaceful national society in addition to the school community.
Right, so that older woman, if that kid had been hauled to court, that older woman would A, not have been able to tell him how much that garden meant to her, B, she wouldn't have been able to find out who he was and what motivated him, and C, she wouldn't have gotten her garden back. She might have gotten juvie
at huge taxpayer expense and been at risk, much more at risk for his whole life path going awry.
And I think a lot of people have the argument, well, then everybody will go out and destroy gardens if they know that all they have to do is sit down with the other person and talk to them. But it's been proven that jail time and other punishments actually do not prevent people from committing crimes.
Right, the traditional criminal justice system, traditional discipline systems don't just reject the behavior, they ultimately translate into a rejection of the person. And any of us who feel rejected then are going to be more likely to
Yeah.
reoffend, commit other crimes, commit other harms, because we start to view ourselves as that way. Whereas restorative practices really holds people accountable. It rejects the behavior.
Right.
It doesn't reject the person. It says, we don't like what you did, but you're going to make it right. You need to make it right. That's the expectation of this whole community has on you.
And the assumption is that individual remains a part of the community.
Exactly.
We're not throwing you away. It's a reintegrative shaming.
Right. Do you want to talk more about circles?
Yeah, so I can give a couple examples.
We do have a phone call.
Great.
Oh, okay.
Awesome.
Hi, thanks for calling. Hello.
Hello?
We hear you.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay, great. Sorry, I was just calling about the restorative practices conversation you guys are having.
Great.
I just wanted to call and see, it sounds like a great idea, and I'm really excited. I've heard some things about it, and I'm excited for this to possibly be integrated in, our community, and especially into our schools.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Get out there.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
You too.
Thanks for calling.
No problem. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay,
So
circles.
Yeah, so another example is I was thinking of a student stealing something from another student, right? The traditional system might suspend that student in school or out of school. The item would need to be returned, but the student who was stolen from may never get a say in what happened. And oftentimes, if they want to be involved in the process, a lot of times we assume conflict or harm is personal. So if someone stole something of mine, our human reaction is to oftentimes assume they must have stolen it from me because they don't like me. There's something wrong with me. And it's possible that absolutely things get stolen because people don't like that person. But frequently, crime and harm isn't personal. It's coincidental. It oftentimes doesn't actually have to do with that one person. Traditional discipline system frequently doesn't allow for that information to come out. So while the person may get punished, they may get suspended, they'll come back to school, maybe I get my item back.
Right.
I never actually feel, as the person harmed, I might not feel a whole lot better because I might still carry with me this fear of further attack, when really it wasn't personal. And the restorative principles and practices allow for that information to come out. It actually allows for me the opportunity, if I want it, it's got to be voluntary, for me to ask, did I do something? Was there a reason you stole from me? It creates this connection, the connectivity between the people. And to me, there's no greater punishment than, as the person who committed the harm, to have to face the person I affected and to have to explain to them why I did what I did, what I was thinking, and then hear what they need from me and actually have to commit to making things right. I mean, that is a harsh punishment, to have to sit across and face the person. So circles and restorative conferencing, similar to mediation, allows for that process to happen.
Now, how do circles and conferences differ from each other?
Yeah, so circles is oftentimes a preventative means to conflict and harm being done in the first place. We integrate, at Safe Futures, our violence prevention team integrates circles on an ongoing basis in our lessons, not to address a harm, but just to talk about lesson topics and create community. So we, as a group, sit in a circle. We have a common topic, which may be a question around one person in my life I'd like to communicate better with, or one goal I have for this summer is. Something that worries me about 6th grade is. It's an opportunity for students to share, and we've gotten a tremendous number of responses and reactions by implementing circles. I have a couple quotes actually from students who said, "Circles are good because we can share our feelings. This helps prevent violence so our feelings don't explode." Another student said, "In circles, you recognize you're not alone." One other student said, "Circles make us feel close with each other, and they're fun." So it's a way of building positive relationships. And the stronger our relationships, as we talked before, the less conflict we have, or not less, but the better we are at managing that conflict.
So have you found doing this that students are surprised that their feelings aren't isolated and that they're shared among their peers?
Constantly.
Yeah, things that you would imagine like everybody would know as a matter of course. We actually did some workshops at Manson Youth Institution, and I was asking the young men, you know, do you feel like this is truly helpful? And one of them said, I think he was 17 or 18 years old, he said, I never knew I had needs. I never knew I had basic human needs until you came and told us.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So we can't assume that people know things that maybe for us are matter of fact.
Yeah.
But I guess if no one's ever communicated that in 17 years, we're not born knowing that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Exactly.
Which is why it's so important that we talk about it. I also recently heard someone say, good instruction's the best classroom management. And circles are such an awesome way of providing instruction. Mm-hmm. One of the things I love about circles is right away I saw how it flipped the dynamic within a classroom. So traditionally in a classroom setting, if you want to say something, you have to raise your hand, right?
Right.
It's universal, that's how it works. The student has to raise their hand, then they get called on by the teacher. So in a traditional classroom setting, you have to opt in to share. You have to have the confidence, right, the awareness to think in your head, okay, I have something important to say, I'm going to raise my hand, wait on the teacher to call me, and then I'll share it. So that means there are a large number of students who, for a variety of reasons,
right,
never raise their hands.
Because that really is putting yourself out there.
It's really putting yourself out there. You have to opt in. Circle, the way that we run circles, is you have to opt out. As you sit in a circle and the subject, the question is presented, then a volunteer is asked, so a student starts, and then it gets passed around the circle. The assumption is, and we say, the assumption is every one of you will share. That's the expectation. You can pass if you want to, but we'll come back to you. So in a circle, you have to opt out. You don't have, and it's amazing the students who share in a circle, who when I'm implementing a lesson that's not run in a circle form would never share. Mm-hmm. It's amazing. I've had students share in circles who I've taught them for years. One student, I'd never heard him speak before.
Wow.
Until the circle. Another student, I believe it was a 6th grade student, I believe it was the first circle we'd ever done in this classroom. And it was the question I stated before. One person I'd like to communicate with better in my life is, it was a pretty giant class, 25, 28 kids. He refused to even come to the circle. He wanted to stay at his desk, head down, on his hands. He did not want to share. So we said, okay, we let him be. We don't force people. We invite them, but we don't force them. So we were working our way around the circle. It got to me. I was the last one. I shared, and then I turned to my right, and I noticed the young man was standing there outside of the circle, and he said, I want to share.
Wow.
And what he shared was he wanted to communicate better with his dad because ever since he had a sister who passed away, he thought his dad blamed him for that. So he shared this deep, deep, profoundly concerning and worrying thing that had we not done the circle,
he never would have known.
Never would have known. Never would have come out.
And this had been a very long-term burden that he was carrying.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the things that come up in circles are just unbelievable. The things young people share and are desperate to share that a traditional classroom forum just doesn't allow space for.
Well, this is much more equalizing, in the classroom, the more extrovert, the more confident
absolutely
are obviously going to get more attention and have the floor more often. We do have another phone call.
Great.
Mm-hmm. Hi, thanks for calling.
Hi.
Hi.
My name's Katie. I live in New London, and I have children in the New London public schools, and I just think this sounds like a great idea. And I'm wondering, what should I, as a parent, do to try to make sure that we get to see more of this in our schools?
That is a great question.
So one of the things I think you can do is familiarize yourself with the terms restorative practice and restorative justice already, and advocate for the administrators and teachers in your children's schools to use these. And also, Rana talked about on the 22nd, Monday night, the 22nd, not this coming Monday, but the following, there's going to be a Board of Ed meeting at 7 p.m. at the Science Tech Magnet School, high school, in New London, to promote restorative practices in the school. So if you could come out to that or get other folks to come out to that, that would be incredibly helpful.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for calling.
Bye.
Bye.
Can you repeat that, what that is?
Oh, sure. If you didn't catch it the last time, this presentation is Monday, June 22nd, 7 p.m. at the Science and Technology Magnet High School in the auditorium. And, you know, the Board of Education is looking at discipline policies, and it's really important to hear from the community.
And I think that there's several people in the community who have created sort of a group around this. Is that right, Kris?
Yeah, there are a lot of different avenues, from the New London Parent Advocates, who then sort of are doing the discipline working group. Yeah, there are a bunch of ways to get involved, for sure.
And I think there's a diversity and equity policy also that's going through the process.
Yes.
That doesn't directly relate to it, but is sort of helps set a stage for a more positive way to look at discipline.
Definitely. Yeah, for anyone interested, you know, you could always contact me at Safe Futures, and I'd be happy to sort of help connect you to other groups if Safe Futures isn't the appropriate venue to tap you into a parent group or. Yeah.
Now, I know this is Restorative Practices Continuum.
Yeah, so this is just this is a visual of some of the processes that Brenda and I have already talked about. The nice thing about restorative practices, again, it's not doesn't just provide tools that can be implemented once a harm has been done. That's the formal conference end there that you're looking at on the right side of your screen. It also has all these informal processes. Affective statements and affective questions are simply a way of getting people to express what's going on with them, or telling people, expressing ourselves, doing a better job as adults, modeling, expressing what's going on for us. Hey, I was really worried that you haven't brought your homework in for the last few days because I know you've been trying to get your grade up and I haven't been seeing you follow through with some of the things you said you were going to do. Would be an example of an affective statement. Mm-hmm. Affective question, when someone does something that you don't like, instead of us snapping, you know, why'd you do that? It's the, hey, what were you thinking just now? It's asking questions in a way that get people to express emotions, to, again, create that connection, create that bond, disapprove of a behavior, but not the person.
And it can be something very minor.
Absolutely.
That just sets the stage.
Absolutely.
Right. So, for example, there's a school in Philadelphia. They talked about the fact that for many years, the neighbors would go into their houses when they knew that the kids were coming to school and leaving school because they were so fearful. They had so much violence. They turned things completely around, and when one of the very small things they did was they took their school resource officers and said, we don't want you standing here policing. What we want you to do is stand there and greet each kid every morning. So every morning there was someone saying hello to every single kid that walked into the school. And because they were doing that every morning, if they noticed that a kid had their head down or they seemed like they had been crying, they would pull the kid aside and ask them what's going on. And suddenly the neighbors were coming out and actually interacting with the youth now when they were going in and leaving school. It completely changed the atmosphere.
Right. Restorative practice is a different approach.
But we have one more phone call, and I want to tell people this is the last phone call because we only have 5 minutes left.
Can't believe it.
Hi, thanks for calling. Hello?
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. I'm sorry. I'm watching the show, and there's a delay when I insist. Brenda, hi. This is Myrna Martinez. You were my instructor in the mediation class. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. I want to say that this is an incredible show. I would love for all Board of Ed members to watch this, for family members to watch this. To the past caller, Katie, thank you so much for your interest. I hope you do come to that board meeting on the 22nd. One of the fascinating pieces here is your point about people are more likely to change behavior if you act with, or if the action is with them versus to them. Mm-hmm. And it's such a, what I love about it is that there's a parallel with education, with actual formal teaching. For instance, to them would be lecturing to, and the with them would be students as a part of the knowledge base and working as groups of people. That's but right. Also the fact that this, at some point, Kris Raitt mentioned about this not being fluff, and I think sometimes people get concerned about a school being a place for the intellectual and not the emotional. That stuff should be taken care of at home. But what I'm really hearing in this conversation is that the emotional is intellectual, that in order to understand how to deal with certain problems, I mean, there's the going into social studies, and as Rana stated, the language arts that's involved with the vocabulary building, with knowing how to state your emotions and deal with problems. I just find it absolutely fascinating. One thing that I'd love addressed is when do these circles take place? I could understand in the elementary school, but in the middle school and high school, when would this take place? When teachers tend to have a class for 45 minutes? And I'll take my answer off there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Anna. Bye.
Bye.
So circles can be implemented incredibly quickly, to be honest. It's amazing how fast students can be at transforming a classroom and really quickly flipping their desks and chairs into a circle. Yes, class lengths vary, but things can be done in incredible speed and with a really simple question or one word answer statement. You can do it in a matter of minutes, depending on class size. Yeah, 10, 15 minutes you may need. But like Brenda, you said, if you don't put the time in up front, you're going to lose it somewhere else.
And a lot of teachers will do this as sort of an opening and closing exercise to the day. So you can do a circle in homeroom and then, take 10 minutes at the end of the day to do a circle.
Right, or check in at the beginning of the week and check out at the end of the week. It doesn't have to be, it's flexible, right?
Well, we have 2 minutes left, and maybe we didn't get to the slide, but maybe we want to just quickly talk about how a restorative approach differs from, we're better than I thought. We have 7 minutes.
Yeah, let's talk about some of this difference.
Yeah, let's talk about the difference between a judicial approach and a restorative approach.
Great. So one of the first differences that was up was that the judicial system views a harm as a violation against the system. And the restorative approach views it as a harm in need of being repaired. So if I am a 6th grader and I stole something of a fellow peer, oftentimes that's viewed as I broke a school rule, right? Mm-hmm. Or I broke a law, as opposed to I hurt this person and I need to repair the harm.
Okay, now the bad news is I was right about the time, and so we're down to our last minute. So maybe just end by giving people ideas if they want to follow up on this in their communities, in their kids' schools. What can they do?
Do an internet search on restorative practices. Talk to your local school board members. Talk to other parents. Go into your school and actually spend some time there and see what's happening.
When and if you have a child who gets in trouble or a child who is harmed by another student, ask the school to use restorative practices to repair that. Try and work, and if the school doesn't know what that is, educate them.
Now, one last question. Do you find that a lot of parents have trouble facing the fact that if their child is a victim or a perpetrator, that a lot of parents themselves don't feel comfortable making that personal connection with the school, with the victim, with the other child?
Absolutely, because they've been brought up like the rest of us with this sort of traditional model of there's a rule, you've broken it, now you're going to be punished. So, you know, we've all grown up with these ineffective conflict behaviors, and we're all trying to unlearn them.
But restorative practices builds community and respect for all individuals. That's why it's worth exploring, and I'm really optimistic that the New London School District and other districts locally are moving in that direction.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, both of you, for coming on tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Well, it was great. I just want to remind people that Monday night you can come to...
Not this Monday, the following. 22nd, right?
The 22nd.
Oh, what is this coming?
It is this coming,
right,
yeah. Time flies. It's already the 16th.
Time flies, you're right.
7 p.m. at the Science and Technology Magnet High School. And if you come, you can hear the presentation, but also I imagine there will be an opportunity for citizens to give feedback and parents to think about what their own children's experience has been and is likely to be in the schools. With that, good night, and I hope we see you all at the Science and Technology Magnet School on Monday.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rana.
Thanks, Rana.
Thanks, Brenda. Thanks, Kris.
Oh yeah, I like this. I was raised down at Fort Trumbull, warm friends and family around me. What's now a blighted neighborhood? Oh, a river to the sea. Soon all that'll be left of it will be nothing but them good old memories. Them parking lots